Ladies and gentlemen, fellas, welcome back in. We have 5 games on a Sunday, and now just like the Saturday slate where a game gets canceled due to weather and it goes to a 2-game early slate and a 4-game late slate, we might see something wacky with this. The games are all throughout the day. I'm going to assume the 5 games are all going to be played at the same time on the same slate. If not, if it's broken up into a 3 or a 2, we'll just use this knowledge and these schmacks for those ones. But I'll be talking through all 5 of these games, at least in terms of the player pools that we discuss. And we're going to go through for player props, for sports betting, for, yes, DFS primarily. And we're going to discuss these 5 games, starting with the quarterback position. So let's get into the quarterback position. Fellas, ladies, gentlemen, I hope you all having a lovely weekend. Hope you all banking and having a good ending to the preseason. We pour one out. We got the hot coffee. We cheers to not only a Be Kind today that says on the coffee, but the last preseason game of 2021. Last slate where we can profit, where we can prosper, where we can have a damn good time, but then we welcome with open arms less than 10 days away from the end of the last game of the preseason to the regular season. So let's start at the quarterback position, and we can start in New England with Mr. Mac Jones. Now, full disclosure, I am recording this on Saturday morning, and the games don't start until Sunday afternoon, so a lot can change here. They might say, hey, you know what, we're not going to be playing much of Mac Jones or these rookies, so just keep that in mind. It'll all be updated on the tiers on Patreon, but I do expect Mac Jones to play because just like Andy Reid and the Chiefs, who have played their starters and the best quarterback in the league, Patrick Mahomes, for a full half each of the last 2 games, or at least a good amount of run until they succeeded, like yesterday with Patrick Mahomes, I do believe that Bill Belichick is going to run his players because there's a lot less padded practices. We talked about this with the Chiefs. The smart head coaches, or at least the old school guys, because I would consider Sean McVay smart and he's not playing anybody, but the old school guys realize that, hey, we have like half as many padded practices this year compared to most because of the new collective bargaining agreement. We need to get these guys at pad level. We'll have an advantage if we end up playing these guys for 2 quarters because everybody else is going to be rusty. In terms of tackling, in terms of blocking, we need to be able to get these guys at pad level, and that's what you've seen so far. So I do think that these Patriots guys are going to play their starters still a decent amount, and just taking into account Mac Jones, who now has taken a ton of reps in practice, seems to be outpacing Cam Newton for the starting job here. I would expect him to start this game. He played 33 snaps week 1, then he played 42 snaps last week. It's not like he's dominating. 146 passing yards, 3 rushing yards last week. I mean, he's basically getting you 6 fantasy points on 42 snaps. That's not great, but he's also been near misses on a couple of touchdowns, right? N'Keal Harry ends up injuring his shoulder. He's out for a month to 2 months on what would have been another 50-plus yard reception, if not a touchdown breaking away. Gunnar Olszewski in week 1 just misses on what would have been a 50-yard touchdown, right? So you're just near missing these stat lines being an extra 30, 40 yards and a touchdown, and now he's got you 10, 11 fantasy points, which is fantastic for the preseason. Mac Jones firmly in play. Now, I currently have 7 total quarterbacks that I find in play for these 5 games, and we'll talk about 4 of them. The other 2 are both of the San Francisco quarterbacks. They came out and said that the starters are going to play 1 to 2 quarters, and that involves Jimmy G. Now, the problem with trying to play Jimmy G there is he doesn't really have much mobility at all. You're not going to get elite upside from his mobility, and if he's playing 1 to 2 quarters, that means that he's either playing 1 quarter good or 2 quarters piss poor / average at best. The problem is, what is 1 quarter good for Kyle Shanahan? Is 1 quarter good 2 drives? He's 7 of 9 for 89 yards and maybe a touchdown. No touchdown there. Then he's got only 2 or 3 fantasy points. He gets the touchdown there. He's got 7 or 8, so it's fine. So Jimmy G's in play because he could potentially play the whole first half here, but there's going to be other quarterbacks on this slate that play a guaranteed half to potentially 3 quarters. I don't see any guys going to play 100% of the games or 100% of the game as of now like we had on the Saturday slates. So that keeps Jimmy G in play, but not as one of the best options. Now, you see Trey Lance, who definitely is needing of some, I would say, more reps in these games. He has not looked fantastic. He's had a couple of nice throws, but not looked fantastic. He's not throwing a changeup. He's only throwing fastballs out there, but he's looked decent. I think they give him a little bit more run. So Trey Lance would be a name that is going to be very popular this week. I think starting a defense against him, like if you want to start Trey Lance and then the defense against him, is a pretty smart thing to do because it gives you a unique lineup. In the regular season, that's not great, but it's not like Trey Lance is going to play all 4 quarters. So they can pick 6 Jimmy G, or they could pick 6 Trey Lance, and it's not that big of a deal. He comes right back on the field, and your defense has points. Trey Lance has played 29 and 34 snaps. He added a couple of rushing yards. He had 8 rushing yards, I believe, on 1 attempt, but he had 2 attempts called back for penalty, so he would have actually ended up running for, in this game, like 20, 25 rushing yards, which is always good to know. He had the 2 touchdowns. He's just throwing fastballs out there, 102 yards last week. Trey Lance is in play. Now, the other one who's in play is a starter who is expected to play at least 2 quarters. So this is where, like, the Sam Darnolds, the Patrick Mahomes, who we got news that those guys are going to play about a half, and then they end up going out on the Friday slate them both throwing 2 touchdowns and having 100+ yards and looking really damn good. That doesn't mean that it happens for every veteran, but at least 2 quarters heading into, ideally, he said, the 3rd quarter, Joe Judge, for the Giants starters. So Daniel Jones, who has not played this preseason yet, is going to at least play 2 quarters, they're saying here. He has to be in play. He has mobility. And this is going to be, for the most part, an offense that he's familiar with from last year. Like Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney aren't expected to play. They weren't there last year. So it's Sterling Shepard. It's Evan Ingram. It's Darius Slayton. He's familiar with these players, and apparently all those guys are expected to play 6 to 8 drives, 2 to 2.5 quarters in this game. They have to be in play, which means Daniel Jones has to be in play. I've got 3 other quarterbacks: Trevor Lawrence, Jacoby Brissett, Nate Peterman, depending on what happens with Marcus Mariota. Peterman, who played the entire game last week. These are things to track, and those 3 names, they could either just be secondary options or they could be the 3 best options on the slate, depending on the news on if the Jags are going to play their guys much, which they haven't really released news at all this preseason. Jacoby Brissett, it seems like he might be seeing a half of football, but if it's only a quarter to a quarter and a half, it's not as good. But with that said, let's slide into now the running back position. And the deepest position normally on these slates is wide receiver, but the deepest position, and it still is, like there's a lot of guys in play just naturally, but the top heavy most, like the best potential plays are all at running back. So it looks like running 3 running backs on these Sunday slates is going to be pretty, I would say, beneficial. So going to the running back position, we can start with the backfield in Cincinnati, where Trevion Williams has still not practiced. He's not expected to play. I would not expect Joe Mixon to play. They said that their starters, Joe Burrow is going to play, and their starters will play with him, but very limited. You might just see 1 drive out of Joe Burrow. Just get in live action, maybe 2 drives. So not even a quarter of plays what I'm expecting for those starters. So that leaves in the backfield here Samaje Perine, who's only played 10 total snaps in 2 games in the preseason. Don't think they'll run him much. And then just like last week, you're going to get Puka Williams, who only played 1 snap, Jaquise Patrick from the XFL, and Chris Evans, the rookie out of Michigan. So Chris Evans and Jaquise Patrick are firmly in play. Last week, Chris Evans played 27 snaps, Patrick 18 snaps, and Chris Evans basically doubled his routes run over Patrick, although he did not see any targets. So he had 9 carries, 35 yards. They're both in play. They're not both going to see elite usage, but I would expect each of them to push towards 8 to 10 touches in this game. The problem is neither of them are fantastic pass catchers, so that's where there's a little bit of a downside or a cap ceiling. Next up is the San Francisco 49ers backfield, where Elijah Mitchell has not practiced this week. Jeff Wilson's still on the PUP list. I don't think they're going to be playing much of Raheem Mostert. He's been dealing with a back injury. Trey Sermon did not play in week 2 because he now has this injury that's come up in camp. So when you look at it, it might just be yet again Wayne Gallman, who played 30 snaps last week, 15 carries for 72 yards and a target, and JaMychal Hasty, who himself had 19 carries last week and caught 3 balls, 22 touches in a preseason game. So both Wayne Gallman and JaMychal Hasty are in play. JaMychal Hasty, though, for me is the one that I really want to be playing because he might play just as much as last week. And he wasn't even efficient. 19 attempts for 58 yards is brutal. I mean, if he just becomes somewhat efficient and has 20 attempts for 80 yards, maybe finds the end zone, continues to see those routes run, JaMychal Hasty over Wayne Gallman, but both firmly in play. And next up is potentially what looks like one of the best running back plays in the slate, New England's backfield. It's not Ramondre Stevenson, believe it or not. They just traded away Sony Michel. That means that Ramondre Stevenson is much more important than he was the last 2 weeks in the preseason, where he ended up going off. Last week, Ramondre Stevenson plays 25 snaps after playing 15 snaps week 1. He has 15 attempts for 66 yards and 2 touchdowns. He ran 6 routes. He saw 2 targets. Stevenson, don't get me wrong, is firmly in play. I mean, I have listed right here about 16 running backs, and then there's a short list of a 10, a quote-unquote short, of about 10, and Stevenson is on that as guys who are definitely strongly in play. But I prefer his teammate, J.J. Taylor, who is now definitely seems like to make this team, who is definitely going to have a role at some point this preseason or this regular season, and he's looked great. He had a team-high 16 snaps week 1 at the running back position, a team-high week 2 26 snaps. He ends up getting 12 carries, 93 yards, and a touchdown. So not only is he getting the usage on the ground, he is so damn efficient after week 1 going for 5 carries for 31 yards. And his big calling card is that he has pass-catching ability. He runs 13 routes. He catches all 3 of his targets for 18 yards. So he ends up getting 15 touches, well over 100 yards and a touchdown last week. I like J.J. Taylor a lot because I expect him, out of all the guys after the Sony Michel trade who are going to see a bump down in usage, don't expect to see much Damian Harris, who's only played 16 total preseason snaps. Don't expect to see James White, 12 total preseason snaps. But I expect less than the 25 snaps you saw from Ramondre Stevenson last week, and a lot more usage for J.J. Taylor, who would be the only running back left, because Jacob Johnson's a fullback, and they have not yet played the 30-plus-year-old Brandon Bolden, who's a special teamer. So basically after that, it's the starters, some Ramondre Stevenson, maybe 16, 18 snaps at most, and then J.J. Taylor running out there for 30-plus snaps. I like that a lot. There's a couple more backfields. I'll highlight Gary Brightwell in the Giants backfield. Saquon's not expected to play. If the starters do play 2 to 2.5 quarters, and they consider Devontae Booker in there with the starters, then he would be the option here here. We have to wait on more news. Otherwise, the rookie Gary Brightwell did play 23 snaps last week, and the encouraging thing was he saw 4 targets on 13 routes. Not a lot of usage overall. This is a loaded backfield with Corey Clement and Sandro Platzgummer and Elijah Penny, so it's not when I really want to target all that much if 5 or 6 running backs are going to play, when other backfields like the ones we just talked about with San Francisco or the ones we just talked about with New England are not as deep. That's the main concern. We can talk through one more backfield here, and it's going to be Cleveland's backfield, where they have a kind of a 3-headed approach. They're going to be having Dearness Johnson, who's been starting, who's played 24 and 25 snaps, who has the inside lead to make his team, and he's been solid. He's so far ran 33 routes and seen 7 targets as a running back. Not only that, but he's seen some work on the ground. Dearness Johnson is somebody that I do like, but he'll probably start and have somewhat of a short leash of only really playing a quarter to and a quarter and a half. Demetric Felton's this running back wide receiver hybrid. Week 1, he was just used as a receiver with 20 routes, no carries. Last week, he ends up being used more as a running back with 8 carries and only 7 routes. It's really frustrating, hard to pin down. I would not prefer him this week over, he's in play, but I would prefer John Kelly, who balled out last week at low ownership and likely gets the final quarter and a half of this game. Last week, he ended up seeing in the game 9 rushing attempts, 58 yards, and a touchdown. It's not like he had insane usage, right? Like he had a couple routes run, he had a target, he caught a ball, so he had 10 touches, but it wasn't insane usage by any means. Week 1, he had 21 snaps. He ended up seeing in that game as well. Week 1, he had 21 snaps. He ended up catching 4 balls and had 12 targets in that game. So I prefer Dearness Johnson out of all 3 of these running backs, then Kelly, and then Felton in the Cleveland backfield. I've got about another 8 or 9 guys listed. I will point out Trey Ragas, who's in the Oakland backfield. They're banged up. They have BJ Emmons and Trey Ragas back there. Ragas played 40 snaps week 1, then 24 snaps week 2. Week 2, he was not great. 6 carries for a yard, but thankfully, he had 2 catches, 24 yards. So like right there, that's 4.5 fantasy points. But thankfully, falls in the end zone to get you to double digits last week. Thankfully for me, as he was in my main lineups everywhere. So those are the running backs. There's another 6 or 7. You can check the Patreon tiers down below. I mean, honestly, there's right now game notes wise, I have 33 pages of notes for these 5 games. I'll have tiers and rankings for this slate, so be sure to check them out down below. Updated news, because if you're a Patreon and you have those, massive leg up. If you're not a Patreon and you don't have those, you can still obviously compete. This information is definitely going to help you. It's just not going to be as abundance of information with the updates, which then could be like bringing a knife to a gunfight. And as we keep going, I want to let you know about the sponsors of the program, SuperDraft. It is a multiplier format, but as I've been saying, if you're not already on there, why are you not on there? 2 things benefit you. 1, if you sign up with the code SAL, you get $25 to play with. Free money. Not bad by any means. The second thing is yesterday's contests only filled at around 55%. Let me say that again. Let me zoom in here. Yesterday's contest only filled at 55%. Now, what does that mean? Well, what that means is that these contests right here, now it's early. I'm recording this in the morning, so there's only 10 people in here. The slate starts in a couple hours. But yesterday, this only filled at about 50 people out of 115, meaning that the other 45% of the contest, the company had to put the money in for, and all those lineups got zeros because it's a guaranteed prize pool. Meaning, even more, we can take another step. If you entered a lineup yesterday, you beat 45% of the field just by scoring 1 point and entering a lineup. There is nowhere else in fantasy, in player props, in betting that you will have a better edge than Overlay. That is what that is called. That is called Overlay. The site is putting in money. You are automatically beating almost half the fucking field. And on a Sunday slate, on the last preseason day, when everybody's getting their last Sundays in, they're at service, they're chilling out, relaxing, maxing all cool while the summer is closing down, they're getting ready for school, they're shopping, whatever it is, they're not going to be playing DFS, they're not going to be updating DFS. So not only do you have an edge up on the 45% of people who won't play, you got an edge up on the other people as well for having this information. Go and play on SuperDraft. Use the code SAL to get $25. They are a partner of ours for 2 years now, but the biggest thing is you have to take advantage of when there is overlay. There's a shit ton of overlay on SuperDraft right now. Go ahead, get the free $Ruskies FREE using the code SAL. Wide receiver goes about 20 deep on this slate, but unlike running back where it's like there's a clear 8 guys, wide receiver there's like, there might be like a clear 2 guys, 3 guys, depending on playing time. We can talk about the New England Patriots, Christian Wilkerson. Wilkerson has played 32 and 39 snaps. He doesn't run deep routes, but there's a lot of guys banged up on this team. Matthew Slater does not play. He's sort of a special teams guy. Now, N'Keal Harry will miss 3 to 4 weeks. I'm not expecting the starters and Jacoby Myers to play more than the 15 snaps that he saw last week. So that leaves a lot of usage for Wilkerson, who's leading this team so far during the preseason with 38 routes run. And he's been solid. Last week wasn't the greatest, but 3 catches for 36 yards, 6.6 fantasy points out of a wide receiver. You would like more. You would like double digits, but it's not killing your lineups. If anything, it's actually helping them in the preseason. So Wilkerson in play. And then his teammate Gunner is also in play because, look, if N'Keal Harry played 36 snaps, a team high in week 1, 28 snaps snaps, was going to have a team high in week 2 before getting hurt. There's more usage now for these guys like Wilkerson, maybe a little bit more Isaiah Zuber, but also Gunner. Gunner went from 16 to 28 snaps last week. He went from running 12 routes to 16. He ended up catching all 4 of his targets for 57 yards. I don't want to put a lot of chips in the basket here, if that's even the right fucking phrase, with Mr. Gunner, because he runs a lot of slot routes. He has been running deeper routes this preseason, but it is a little bit of a concern. He was kind of hyper efficient, a 25% target rate. That's not insane, but it's higher than average last week. So he's firmly in play. I prefer Wilkerson. We can say a quick note about the Giants guys. The Giants guys are expected to play 2 quarters here. Darius Slayton played 13 snaps in week 1, did not play in week 2, but if he's going to play 2 quarters here, Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard have to be in play. Sterling Shepard has not yet played in this preseason, but apparently he's going to play 2 to 3 quarters. So these Giants guys look like priorities if you actually believe that they're going to play 2 to 3 quarters here. So that would be both Sterling Shepard and Mr. Darius Slayton. I'll also point out that Dante Pettis has been playing well, and so is David Sills. David Sills continues to play well for us. 32 snaps and 40 snaps so far in the preseason. Last week, 3 catches, 31 yards, and a touchdown. Basically 10 plus fantasy points. That's now having 7.9 and over 10 fantasy points. The problem is if the starters play a lot, Sills 32 and 40 snaps, and his 24 routes run that he had last week, they might drop to like only 16 routes run, so he becomes a much worse play. Sills is still in play. I expect him to be the guy who does run a lot in the second half, and a little bit with the starters here, as he seems to be the guy definitely making the team. But keep in mind, you didn't have Darius Slayton or Sterling Shepard the last 2 weeks when he was playing well, and now you do, so I would settle your expectations a little bit there. We head now to Cleveland, where Jamarcus Bradley had a massive week 1 and did not play week 2 due to injury. If he ends up playing this week, right, we'll track that news, he's going to be a star player, because this is a depth chart in Cleveland that is already lacking. Don't expect Odell, don't expect Landry to play. They did not play the first 2 weeks. Do not expect Anthony Schwartz to play, who's a rookie who has not practiced and has not played. I would not expect much out of Donovan's People-Jones, as he seems to be winning the number 3 wide receiver job right now over Rashad Higgins. He's only played 15 snaps a week so far in the preseason. Ryan Switzer, they had to put on IR. So quickly this roster starts to weed out. Jamarcus Bradley, week 1, 46 snaps, 28 routes run. 28 routes run for a bigger body receiver is elite. He caught 2 of the targets that he had for 38 yards. So he's in play. Davion Davis, who's actually suspended for the regular season but can play in the preseason, ended up playing 33 snaps last week. Caught 3 balls and 4 targets for 45 yards. So Davion Davis and Jamarcus Bradley are in play. My favorite plays from Cleveland's wide receiver core. If there's no Bradley again, then insert Cardero Hodge, insert some Rashad Higgins. JoJo Natson played 42 snaps, 25 routes. Not a good player, though. Only 1 target, so I really don't want to go there too much. So that's where I'd be focusing on Cleveland. A very similar analysis as we just had for Mr. Jamarcus Bradley for heading to San Francisco. Now, Juwan Jennings, who did not play week 2, but had a massive snap share week 1 of 38 snaps, ran 23 routes, had 2 rushing attempts for 23 yards, 2 targets. Juwan Jennings would be firmly in play and maybe be lower owned because they didn't play last week, so people have not heard the name back-to-back weeks, like a David Sills, like a Terrace Marshall, who has gone off now 3 straight weeks in the preseason, right? And he ended up being really highly owned on Friday's slate. So Juwan Jennings is in play, and since the starters are expected to play 1 to 2 drives, there's no Brandon Ayuk, so Deebo Samuel, he should be playing 1 to 2 quarters in this game, so I would expect 18 snaps, maybe sees a couple targets. Mohamed Sanu, Deebo Samuel, just think about them as fringe in play because they might only play a quarter to a quarter and a half, might only see 2 targets, 3 targets, but they can do a lot with those as talented players. Now there's a list of like another 10 to 15 guys: Laquan Treadwell from Jacksonville, Auden Tate from Cincinnati, and Mike Thomas, right? Colin Johnson and Laviska Shenault's on here from Jacksonville. The Cowboys guys in Semi and Foco, Noah Brown, Osiris Mitchell, Cedric Wilson. There's a long laundry list. Philip Dorsett, DJ Turner, Dylan Stoner from Las Vegas. These are a long list. These guys all look very similar. They'll end up in the tiers somewhere for me. More news will obviously benefit the guys who get positive news. And then as we close out this slate, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, the subscribe button, let me know in the comment section who is your favorite wide receiver play this week out of that loaded wide receivers. I'm curious to see what people are thinking. We'll go to tight ends now. Evan Ingram has to be in play if he's going to play 2 to 3 quarters. That's just how it is. He's going to be a very good option for you. We'll end up seeing where he finishes in the ranks if he is number 1. He has not yet played this preseason though. Next up is Jordan Franks though, who's really hard to pass up. After playing 39 and 42 snaps, Jordan Franks for this Cleveland team. I would not expect Austin Hooper or David Njoku to play. You did not see Harrison Bryant play last week or Steven Carlson, so keep an eye on if they play. But either way, he ended up running 23 routes and then 24 routes in the first 2 weeks. Now Connor Davis, who last week played 48 snaps for Cleveland at tight end, who also led the team with 28 routes at the tight end position, 5 targets to Frank's 7 targets. He's on IR. So they have just no bodies left here. Now some of these guys like a Hunter Bryant or a Steven Carlson could return, but I would expect Jordan Franks to play close to 40 snaps if they run that many plays and run 25 to 30 routes. Jordan Franks is one of the better tight end plays on the slate. I then have like another 6 guys who look look pretty similar. We can finish it off with just one of them, and that would be Nick Eubanks, who did play 43 snaps last week. Nick Eubanks ran 25 routes, only saw one target. He has now ran 42 routes and only seen 3 targets this preseason. He's on the Dallas Cowboys. Do not play Nick Eubanks if Sean McKinnon plays for Dallas. He did not play last week. He ended up playing a lot in the Hall of Fame game, ran 10 routes in week 1. So do not play him if Sean McKinnon plays. There's other tight ends like Luke Farrell, Alex Ellis, John Rain, Charlie Warner from San Francisco, Mason Strank. These guys are all guys who are probably going to run 15, 16 routes, see 1 to 2 targets. You're hoping for a touchdown there. So that is it. That is the full slate for this 5-game slate. There's obviously a lot more news that will come out these next 24 hours, but not too much because these teams are done practicing. It'll more so just kind of be like, oh, we're expecting this guy to play a lot, or this is the exact playing time, or oh shit, Jamarcus Bradley isn't playing, right? So there's some key news. Juwan Jennings, Jamarcus Bradley, some of the running backs, are these guys going to be actually suiting up, or guys in their backfield not suiting up, which makes guys like Jordan Franks, the tight ends, look even better for a secure 35 to 40 snaps. So thank you for tuning in today. Be sure to support the sponsors in SuperDraft. Once the regular season starts and that $50,000 to first contest on SuperDraft starts getting promoted by more people than just myself, the contests aren't going to have overlay. Take advantage of the contest now with thousands of dollars in them, where literally yesterday, 50% of the field approximately did not fill, and you beat half the field just by entering a lineup. That shit does not happen in DFS today. Take advantage of it while it's happening. Use the code SAL to get $25 Rooskies. Get in on Patreon down below for these 33 pages and notes and the tiers and ranks. I appreciate you all so much. It's been a beautiful preseason. We've dominated it. Let's end on a good note. Hopefully we can end up being up around 25 to 30K by the end of this slate instead of just 20K. We want more profits, more dollar Rooskies, more green, baby. Let's do it. Fellas, ladies, best of luck on this final slate. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you in the next one.